Hey, let's talk about the 21st Amendment. Oh, hi, Dr. Robertson.
Hi, Dr. Mosley. How are you today?
Doing pretty good.
So we have talked about French wines.
Mm.
We have talked about Italian wines.
Oh,
Now we're going to talk about wines from the U.S.
USA. Yeah, sounds great.
So it's winemaking in the U.S. is kind of interesting because historically, like when people moved to the United States, settlers, they did not drink much water. They drank hard apple cider, they drank wine, they drank beer. The reason that the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, they were supposed to go to Virginia. The reason they landed at Plymouth Rock is they ran out of beer, and they had to stop and build a brewery.
I mean, I gotta have priorities here.
That's the thing is, like, they didn't, the water, especially on a months-long journey in barrels, the water could actually go bad and get polluted or contaminated. So they drank beer, and when they ran out of beer, they had to stop.
Makes sense.
So so there's a long history of winemaking in the United States.
I actually already noticed South Dakota. There are several wineries.
Oh, well, they must be relatively newer.
Yes. Do you know Jay Lohr?
Yeah.
He went to South Dakota State University. Yeah. We actually used to take people to a winery right outside my town. Sorry.
Okay, we'll get there.
Okay. So in 46 states, all except.
So winemaking, long history in the United States.
Yeah.
But then Prohibition came about, and suddenly we're not. All that stopped.
Yeah.
And so many of the vineyards died, and winemaking was kind of wiped out. And so in the 1930s, winemaking in the U.S. basically started over. It's like wipe the slate clean, started over. American winemaking tends to have high safety and technological standards for how it's made. Mm-hmm. But up until the 1970s, it wasn't regarded for being good quality wine. I mean, It was good quality in the, like, shopping at Walmart is good quality because, they have a large selection and, they're always going to have it. But it's not like,
Well, part of it was also just the plain snobbery of the old world versus the new world.
Goodness, yes.
Yes. I mean, and you still get it.
Yeah.
I mean.
American winemaking is also an expanding market that it used to be not many Americans drank wine. Many more do now, and it's a growing market. More Americans are consuming wine.
Yeah.
And 45 states produce wine, except apparently this is out of date since you say you have wine in South Dakota. Until you bring me a bottle of South Dakota wine, I don't believe it. No.
Fine. You know what? When I finally go back home, hopefully not in the winter, I will bring back a bottle just for you.
Yeah, I'm going to peel that label off, and it's just going to be stuck on there with rubber cement.
Yes, it will be. No, it won't.
So, Georgia makes wine. All the states except for Alaska, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Wyoming. There's a lot of diversity of wine types in the United States. Lots of different types of grapes and lots of different types of wines. So as in the old world, especially, they're known for 2 or 3 things they're really good at. In America, it's like, hey, we'll try anything. Throw it at the wall, see if it sticks.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So I'll tell you about some important figures in winemaking. Probably the biggest one is Paul Masson. Okay?
The guy had a healthy appetite. So, I mean, really, we're talking about, not the biggest one. Okay, sorry.
So, and I'm going to guess that, before he became famous as a snooty winemaker, his name was probably Paul Mason. But, then it became Paul Masson. He lived from 1859 to 1940. And he was known as the Champagne King of California. So this is the beginning of that conflict between the United States and France over wine labeling, that he made sparkling wine in California and called it champagne. And France is like, hold up a minute. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You can't do that. And so, you know, it's an ongoing, to this day, legal conflict between the two countries. But he was a winemaker in France. He moved to the United States because of phylloxera, which was the disease that destroyed all the European grapes that I talked about in the very beginning, talking about wine. So once that happened, he's like, well, I'm going to go to America and grow and make wine. Next important character.
My man.
What's that?
My man, Ernest.
Ernest Gallo. So you go in the grocery store, Ernest and Julio Gallo, the big jug wines, you know, that are on the bottom shelf in the wine area of the grocery store. Those are Ernest and Julio Gallo wines. So he lived from 1909 to 2007. He grew up in California. More than even that he was a winemaker, he was an entrepreneur. He was a business guy. And so he was known as, his wine is like the Campbell's soup of wine. So in America, if you get soup, it's Campbell's. If you got wine, it was Ernest and Julio Gallo. It's like inexpensive, mass-produced.
Well, and that was part of the reason why people looked down on us for the longest time, is that this was our big wine.
And the thing was, he had no interest in making good wines. It's like, I can make a lot more being kind of the Walmart of wine and selling a lot of it than trying to be fancy with it.
Yeah.
So that's what he did. And he was very politically connected, so he was able to really kind of set the standard and control winemaking in the United States for a long time.
Yep.
Now, we'll move to the next guy. He's kind of the opposite of Ernest Gallo. This guy named Robert Mondavi. So when you see Mondavi wines, and he has a bunch of different labels out there, this is the guy. Lived from 1913 to 2008. And he was opposite. He's like, okay, we've proven we can grow grapes. Let's make wine that's as good as anywhere in the world. And so that's what he did. And so he went to France to learn how to make wine. And he partnered with these French winemakers. And it was a funny story because he's like, he went over there and they're like, oh, that's cute. Look at this American wanting to work in French winemaking. So they let him in because they figure,
what's the worst that can happen? Yeah.
Yeah, what's the worst that can happen? Well, he created some of the best wines in the world and took the title from the French of being, of like, this is the best. In 1976, he had 2 bottles of wine, a red and white. They're like, these are the best wines in the world.
And I believe they watched a movie, or it was one of the recommended viewings was pretty much about him. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
just a little side note, what was it, 1995, 1996, this guy kissed my wife. So
that son of a...
It was at a party, and he was going through shaking everybody's hand, and he got to her and kissed her on the cheek. So he's like, I'm old, I can get away with that.
Well, and that was the old days too. I don't recommend anybody really doing that nowadays. So
yeah. And so one of the things he's famous for is he actually invented a type of wine. He created one called Fumé Blanc. So what this is fumé is a French word that means fog or cloudy. So he took a Sauvignon Blanc grape, which is not one that's known for being aged, and he barrel aged it like a Chardonnay. Huh. And he created his own wine. And it's what he's famous for. So other things about U.S. wines. We have label laws. And if you're going to put a vintage date on a bottle, if you're going to say, a 2008 Fumé Blanc Mondavi, that means that 95% of the wine has to be grown that year. Mm. And if you put a date on it, you have to say where it was grown. You have to have an appellation of origin.
Yeah. If you like it, you put a ring on it, or in this case, a date on it.
Pretty much. That if you're going to claim it's something special, you got to follow some rules.
Mm-hmm. This isn't Nam.
There are rules. So in America, most of our wines are varietals, which mean we label them based on the type of grape that's used to make them. And usually they're mostly made from one type of grape. But if you get a bottle of wine and it's a varietal, like you go and you buy your bottle of white Zinfandel, you expect, it's made from Zinfandel grapes. But legally, it has to be made from 75% Zinfandel grapes. So they could use others if they want to, but the varietal designation in the United States means it has to be 75%. Most winemakers do 100% because they're trying to, they're all competing and basing it on quality. And so they try and be very clear with the consumer of what they're getting. So in America, we do varietal labeling, except
there's
this is the
always
great thing about winemaking. There's always an exception.
Yeah.
If it's made from Vitis Labrusca, which is the Concord grape, which is a big American grape, this is what Manischewitz is. So it makes a sweet, almost port-like wine. But it's a different type of grape. I mean, this is like the difference between a chimpanzee and an orangutan. It's like they're both monkeys or apes, but they're not the same. So this is the only other type of grape. This is the only grape that's used to make wine that is not Vitis vinifera. There's like one exception. Let's see. Like I said, in America, we tend to make the French angry because we name our wines after regions where they make their wines.
Yeah.
And they're like, whoa, 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 Chablis, that's us. That's our wine. And it's like, no, that's what we're going to call our, $8 a gallon white wine that we sell on the bottom shelf.
Take that, Frenchie.
Yeah, really. That's like, and the red $8 a gallon wine, that's going to be Burgundy. And that's what we're going to call it. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, and really there isn't, because their laws are for their country.
Yeah, but trust me, they go to the court, international court law, like at the UN, constantly. I mean, it is an ongoing. Treaties are written about this. This is an ongoing debate, ongoing fight.
Yeah.
So wine in America can be named from a region, and it's supposed to be similar to the wines that come from that region. So Champagne or Sauternes. If you see it, like a generic American wine that has these terms, it's supposed to be similar to the European equivalent. Things that have to go on a label. It has to have the ABV, the alcohol by volume.
Yeah.
So table wines, this is regular wine, 7 to 14% is normal. If it's more than 14% alcohol, then it's labeled a dessert wine. So the dessert wines tend to be high in alcohol, high in sugar.
Yeah, but they also tend to be a much smaller pour too.
Yeah, that's true. And then wine beverages, these are wine coolers, wine spritzers, things like that. They tend to be less than 7%. But I think that there is still one Bartles and James wine cooler made in the United States. Everything else is a malted beverage, which means it's actually equivalent to beer. I don't know if there are any true wine coolers even made anymore.
It's tough because, I mean, the labeling is always kind of a little confusing. Yeah. Even if they call it a wine cooler, is it?
Yeah. So with our labels, we have to have the type of grape. We have to have the region. And for those regions, 75% of the grapes have to go there. So if I put Napa Valley on my wine, 75% of those grapes have to come from the Napa Valley. Let's see.
So there's like 2 or 3 countries where the grapes can be grown? Or counties? Counties, sorry.
Yeah, because like you'll end up with these growing regions that the vineyards don't necessarily follow the geographic borders.
No.
And so there are some exceptions. The Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms, and Tobacco, which is funny. The Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms, and Tobacco control so the same people that regulate gun sales also regulate champagne labeling.
It's almost like they're probably spread out a little too thin.
Yeah. Allow some special considerations for 3 different states. So California, Washington, and Oregon. These are typically the premier wines from America come from these 3 states. Yeah. So they go a little deeper with their laws there. And so you can have some blends of different types of grapes from different areas, but we'll get into that. So within the United States, we have areas that are called viticultural areas. And this is the region where a wine comes from. And this is like the French idea of terroir. So it's the soil, the climate, all these things combined in this space to make this wine taste special.
So very special. Yeah, and really, I mean, if you haven't been to a vineyard out in California, you really owe yourself that.
So if you get a wine and it's labeled as a bottle estate, that means that all the grapes come from a winery that own and control all the growing in that particular viticultural area, and that the grapes are crushed, fermented, finished, aged, processed, and bottled all on site.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, so an estate bottled wine, these are the artisan wines. They're like, hey, we're going to control everything for quality and do it ourselves because we like getting our hands dirty, and we're going to make the best thing we can be and be proud of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you probably get to charge more too.
Now, it can say, just have like the name of a winery on it, not say bottled estate. And if that's the case, then 75% of the wine has to be fermented at that address. So like you can have a winery and all you're doing is like fermenting it on site.
Mm.
Yeah. So you buy your grapes and you bring them in and you make the wine there. Let's see. There are things that we allow that are governed by law, like adding alcohol and or making changes to it, adding carbonation. All those are things that are governed by the law that I'm not going to cover in great detail. One thing I will talk about is that if I want to produce a sparkling wine, like a champagne, which uses a two-stage fermentation process.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'll get to explain that in great detail, but if that's done at the address, I can label that as at my winery if I do this two-stage fermentation there. So
it has to all be done there.
Yeah.
For that.
Then we have things that can say blended and bottled by, which means, I have got some wine and some other wine from maybe my neighbors, and we're going to blend them all together here and make it. And then you can have cellared and bottled by, which is just, we just stored the wine in my basement, and now it's mine.
Well, somebody's got to store it, so.
So it's nice to know what those different labels mean. Estate bottle tends to be the really high quality ones.
Yeah.
Oh, I already talked about the viticultural area. Somehow I got that slide twice.
Which is all good.
So we'll talk about the big four states in the United States: California, Washington, Oregon, and New York. These produce great wines. They produce the best wines in America generally. New York has some of the oldest wineries in the United States, and they have tons.
Huh.
New York really
never would have guessed
making
it.
Wine. Now, outside of those, you do have wines from other places, like Arkansas. So, Matt, have you ever had a good glass of Arkansas wine?
I cannot say that I have.
It's funny, wine production in Arkansas started in the early 1800s, even before it was a state. They had over 106 wineries. This was like America's winemaking region was Arkansas.
Well, I mean, we hadn't gotten to, we haven't figured out that we can grow grapes out in Napa Valley quite yet, I guess.
Oh, we hadn't even been to Napa Valley yet.
Yeah.
But after Prohibition, only 2 of those survived. Another interesting winemaking state is Hawaii. Now, Hawaii only has one commercial winery, and it's relatively new, for winemaking, started in the 70s. And I gotta say, I love their wine. It's amazing. It's like nothing else in the world. And what it is they make wine with pineapple.
That sounds actually pretty good.
Instead of using grapes, they use pineapple.
Well, I know in like Michigan, they use cherries for a lot.
Yeah, and it's great. And so they have both a still wine and they have a sparkling wine. So like champagne, it's made in the traditional method champenois. So it's a traditional style champagne made in Hawaii with pineapples. It's fantastic. fantastic.
So
It
is it
tastes
probably
like
higher alcohol, right? Because
it's
I gotta,
relatively high alcohol just
yeah, I
because
gotta
of the
imagine with all that sugar, you
yeah.
know.
But it's amazing because it smells like champagne, it tastes like champagne, and yet it also smells like pineapple. I can't I love pineapple, so I can't say enough about it positive, but it's one of those, it's not a gimmick. It's a real it's the real deal.
Yeah. Excellent.
Idaho Idaho used to be known for growing wine, but after Prohibition, not so much until the 1970s. And then, Idaho's again one of those northern states that has some good range for growing, especially white wines and cold weather wines like dessert wines.
Mm-hmm.
And so since the 70s and 80s, they've really kind of come on strong with a few wineries making some very good wines. Indiana. So Indiana,
yeah.
From 1802 to 1820 was, again, the premier wine growing region in the United States. But then after Prohibition, all those went away. There were no wineries until 1971, and then Oliver opened up in 1972. Oliver Wineries. You ever had Oliver wine, Matt?
Not that I can. You know what? Maybe. I don't know. I don't think
It
so.
was on the menu in the John Purdue room.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And you know who was responsible for ordering a lot of that stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
The JPR. Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, but Butler, I'm guessing that has to do with Butler University.
yeah, I'm sure it's the same.
Yeah. And I mean, there's several more that have come up since then. I know in Lafayette, Indiana.
Yeah. That's the thing. Wine making is a growing industry at every state, and that's just because you're not Napa Valley, you're not France, doesn't mean you can't do it.
Well, it's a tourist thing too. Because they have people just stop, do tastings, right? And they buy it, they see the production, and the wineries make money from that quite a bit. So
Illinois, not a lot to say about Illinois.
Nah, there's not really anything to say.
Michigan, oddly enough, has a lot of range dedicated to growing grapes. They produce a relatively high amount of grapes. They make a lot of different styles, dry to sweet. They make ice wine there, which if I have time in this class, I'll teach you about ice wine. If not, look up some videos or.
Yeah, we talked about it briefly in other videos, but yeah, ice wine is an interesting product. So.
They have 4 viticultural areas in Michigan. So they have a pretty established wine growing industry there. Yeah. This is one that people don't think of as being like premier winemaking.
I don't know why. I mean, the garbage state. I mean, New Jersey, the Garden State.
Yeah.
It's weird.
So it's funny. The Royal Society of Arts in England recognized New Jersey for their excellent wines back in the 1700s.
Oh, danged.
And by 1870, New Jersey made more sparkling wine than anywhere else in the world, including champagne. So they were the premier sparkling wine region in the world.
Now, this is an interesting factoid.
Yeah. New York. New York is really only ranks behind California, at least in their history of wine making. This is where the Vitis Labrusca, the Concord grape used one from making Manischewitz, comes from. They make more than 35 million gallons of wine. And the New York state laws say if you're going to have a name, you're going to say, hey, this is a Finger Lakes wine or whatever, 75% of those grapes have to be grown in New York State. So the 4 regions that New York is really known for, the Finger Lakes, this produce wines that are similar to Champagne. The Hudson Valley, Long Island. Long Island is kind of interesting because you don't think of Long Island when it comes to wine.
Yeah.
But it is the only grape growing region in the world that's surrounded on 3 sides by water, because you've got the bay on one side, you've got the Atlantic Ocean on the other. So what you get are very moderated temperature swings. And so it is an area that weather-wise is like Bordeaux and Napa Valley. So this is one of the best. Now, they don't take advantage of it, but weather-wise, this is one of the best wine growing areas in the world.
Yeah, I mean,
Long
really,
Island.
honestly, who would think, because it's so far north, all I think of is snow.
Yeah.
You know?
Lake Erie, also known for their wines. Ohio and Oregon. Oregon's up there with Washington and California now for like really premier wines. Let's see. In 1970, they adopted their own appellations, which means they adopted their own labeling laws.
Yeah.
So like, if you want to have a vintage dated Oregon wine, it has to have 95% of the wine come that year. Varietal has to be 90% of that grape if you're going to label it as. Whereas the rest of the country says 75 is fine. Oregon's like, no, we're going to be known for our quality. We're really going to stick to this.
Yeah, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right.
Yeah, and along those lines, Oregon is the only state that says, you know what, we're not going to grow any generic wines. You can't grow a Chablis or a Burgundy in Oregon and call it that. If you're going to grow it here, you're going to make a varietal. You're going to make a good wine.
Sounds good.
We want to be known for doing it right. So they have their viticultural areas, the Willamette Valley, the Rogue Valley, Applegate Valley. These are all areas that are known for great wines. And what the types of grapes are known for is Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Gris. So again, if you're looking for a wine, and Oregon wines tend not to be super expensive because there's not the same demand for them. But if you find one from this region that is one of these grape varieties, it's probably a pretty good wine.
Well, the nice thing about finding a wine like that that's good and cheap is that if you're hosting a big event where people have pre-poured glasses, it's going to taste good and it's going to keep the cost down.
Yeah. Let's see. Kind of going through these quickly now. Texas also had a expansive wine growing region. The Valverde Winery from 1883 still exists. Virginia has an interesting wine history. They produced their first glass wine bottle in 1608. That's really going back there. And had a reputation for making Bordeaux-style wines that were very good, going back 400 or 500 years. And Thomas Jefferson was an avid winemaker. The most expensive bottle of wine in the world is actually one from his person that has a label that he wrote. It's a handwritten label he wrote and signed. Like it was a $2 million bottle of wine.
Wow.
Washington, like I said, is only second behind California as a major wine producer. Makes wines similar to Bordeaux and Burgundy areas of France. They've been making wine since 1872. They have 6 viticultural areas. Their best being, and their first, the Yakima Valley. If you find a Washington wine from one of these areas, the Columbia Valley, Yakima Valley, Walla Walla, Puget Sound, Red Mountain, or Columbia Gorge, probably a pretty good wine. And they're known for their Chardonnay, Gewürztraminer, Sauvignon Blanc, Merlot, and Cabernet Sauvignon wines. And then we have California.
California.
So California has 4 major regions, each which have their own areas within those. So on the North Coast, some of the famous wine growing regions, the Napa Valley, Sonoma, Mendocino, Lake County, these are famous for making really good wines. Also, you have the North Central Coast, like Monterey. So, Matt, you ever see the movie Step Brothers?
Yeah.
Do you remember what was the event at the completion or the climax of the movie that they were attending?
Wasn't it actually the Monterey Wine Festival or something?
It was. They were tasting the Monterey wine tasting.
That guy's got a voice like an angel.
Yeah. Which at the time wasn't an actual event, but after the movie, that it created enough demand that they actually created that event, and now it's an annual thing.
I mean, but that's something that the students should take from a lot of this stuff, is that tourism can happen from any kind of inspiration.
Yeah.
if something happens in a movie and it happens to occur in your area and it's not a thing and the
Make it a
movie was
thing.
good, jump on it. Just jump on that grenade and run with it, okay?
The North Central Coast, that's Monterey, Santa Clara, Livermore again. San Joaquin Valley, I'll talk about that, I think, in a minute. The South Central Coast, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, again, all these areas, man, fantastic wines, known for it. All very different, distinct. You know, we have cool white wines, we have warm weather red wines, and everything in between. So there are 327,000 acres under growth in California right now. And the winemaking originally came to California from Mexico. So, you know people moving up the coast.
Just in comparison, Michigan, if I remember right, was only 1,800 acres. That's 1,800 acres.
So that's a huge industry. Yeah. And I'll talk in a minute. I'll show you. I'll give you an illustration of how big the industry is. One of the wines that California is known for is a white Zinfandel, which is a sweet, inoffensive pink wine that is kind of like everybody's introduction to wine because it's like it's Kool-Aid but with alcohol. But it was invented in California in 1869. So how big is the industry? The wine industry in California is about 45 to 50 billion. The film industry is only 30 billion.
Wow.
So the wine industry is bigger than the movie industry.
Yeah.
The wine country in California is the second biggest tourist attraction in the state. The only thing bigger is Disneyland.
Yeah. And this year it might be bigger than Disneyland.
Yeah, it probably will be. Let's see.
UC Davis.
UC Davis. So the University of California early on had said, you know what, we're going to get on this bandwagon. And so if you want to learn about winemaking, the best place to go in the world is UC Davis. They have a master's program there where half the program you're in class, the other half you are traveling the world, studying abroad, making wine. So like if you want to learn about, so they are cutting edge of wine development, wine technology, everything coming out of UC Davis. But it's one of those things that this is kind of it's a wealthy person's game. Cost of land there about $100,000 an acre.
Yeah. And
you're not going to get, it takes a minimum of 5 years before you'll see your first bottle. And so this is, unless you've got a lot of money to invest and a long time to wait, it's a wealthy person's game. The wine that California is probably best known for now is our Chardonnay. It's all, it's almost become a joke with the wine mommies that, they have their glass of Chardonnay. But why is California famous for the Chardonnay? Because they do it really well. And there are at least 800 different bottled brands, labeled brands of Chardonnay that come out of California. At least 800. There are about 24 different types of wine grapes that are grown commercially in California. That are of significant quantity, big enough to be economically impactful.
Well, and California is so diverse, like geographically, some of this stuff is just amazing what you can grow in there. Yeah.
So here's a map where it kind of shows the different regions and where they sit in the state. So, the most northern one is the north coast up there with Sonoma and Napa Valley. San Joaquin sits inland a little bit, but along a river valley. The north central coast, in Monterey is in the middle of the state, and then down closer to the bottom at Santa Barbara, we have the south central coast. So these are the regions that are, they grow wine in other places in California, but these are really the some of the more famous. So Napa and Sonoma Valley are probably the two most famous for their quality. Give you some idea, between the two of them, it's over 100,000 acres. And between the two of them, about 450 wineries. These include Mendocino County and Lake County. The wines are really known for Cabernet Sauvignon, Zinfandels, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, of course, and Merlot. So again, if you're looking to buy a bottle of wine, a Zinfandel from the Napa Valley is probably going to be very good. A Sauvignon Blanc from the Napa Valley is probably going to be very good. Yeah. And this represents about 12% of California wine production.
Well, which is interesting because it's a third of the growing area.
Yeah.
But we'll learn more about that.
North Central, Monterey County, Santa Clara, Livermore, what they're really known for is Syrah or Shiraz. Grenache and Viognier. These are the wine. Again, you find a Monterey Viognier, probably a good bottle of wine. The South Central Coast, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, known for Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir. And then the San Joaquin Valley, which I said I'd come back to and talk about separately. This area represents over half of all the wine production in California, but what they make are the bulk wines. So the wine that's in the box, on the bottom shelf, the wine that's in the jug that takes two hands to pick up, those are coming from the San Joaquin Valley. They tend to be inexpensive table wines, and what they're really looking for is consistency. That's the definition of quality, is it's the same every time.
Well, and I mean, it's the reason why it's so mass produced is because this stuff is what you'll see everywhere, and it's cheap, and it just
right. So how did California become this powerhouse so relatively quickly? One thing, it's near San Francisco, so you've got San Francisco is a premier food town in the world. It's also Southern California is where basically America's fruits and vegetables come from. So you have so much fresh fruit and vegetables. You have the seafood and everything coming into San Francisco. You have this major metropolitan, sophisticated city that's known for their food. You have people like Alice Waters, which are restaurateurs whose whole thing is we want to make food that tastes like the area, that's fresh and excellent. All these things kind of came together in California. Also, you have the right weather. It's got sunshine. You've got warm days and cool nights. The relatively close either to the river valley or to the ocean moderates the temperature so you don't get wild temperature swings. You've got the participation of the University of California at Davis with all their leadership in wine and viticulture. And then you've got the money. California's a state with a lot of people who have money to spend to say, hey, I'm going to be a winemaker. Look at me, I'm rich. I made all my money in tech, or I made all my money in Los Angeles, and now I'm going to open a winery. People like Francis Ford Coppola, the winemaker, takes his fortune, creates a winery. And so it's very much of a lifestyle thing in California.
Well, lifestyle and status symbol, And,
I know that all this stuff is confusing, but, in the last 40 years, they've gone from 200 wineries to 1,600. And it covers everything from Two Buck Chuck, which is the house wine from Trader Joe's, all the way up to estates like Harlan Estate, which is a world-famous, world-class winery, and everything in between.
Yeah, and for the record, Two Buck Chuck is pretty tasty.
Yeah, and since California doesn't have this long history like Europe where things have kind of been written in stone and can't be changed. This is an area that's driven by technology, and whatever works, they're going to do. And so their winemaking is constantly evolving. What's good and new, what areas they can grow, what grapes are going to grow, constantly in flux, because they're not married to any one way of doing it. They just want to do what makes it the best.
Well, and it helps prevent stagnation too. I mean, just being stuck in, anybody could make a hamburger. You pat it together, you put it on the grill, but I'll
give you some guidelines about selecting a wine, and just kind of keep in mind that these are approximate guidelines.
Okay.
One thing, the price of the wine does not indicate quality. So generally, prices are controlled by supply and demand. And if something gets a reputation as being a good wine and a lot of people want to buy it, then the price goes up. But, we showed there's not especially like Napa Valley, there's not a ton of production that comes out of there relatively, these are small wineries. So if one of them has a reputation for being really good, or many of them have reputations for being really good, the price goes up.
Mm.
Older wineries actually tend to, more established wineries like Mondavi, they tend to be a little cheaper because the winery, the land is paid for. Whereas a new winery, they have more cost to cover. They've bought equipment, they have capital costs, they have land and all those things. They have to recover that cost. So newer wineries, the new wines tend to be more expensive. So older wines, which also have a track record, maybe better, tend to be cheaper. Just because they're cheaper doesn't mean they're not good or even better. One thing California is known for is its use of oak barrels to age its Chardonnay, which gives them that distinctive buttery vanilla flavor that California Chardonnays are known for. And that's expensive. Oak barrels are not cheap. And so that, an oaked California Chardonnay is going to be more expensive just because that's the way it's made. Okay, that's pretty much what I've got for American wines.
Oh, excellent.
It's a lot of information. I hope you
It
were taking a
was.
little bit of it.
But you know what? I enjoyed every last minute of it. So,
all right. Well, thank you.
See y'all.